What is Saddiq Bey's ceiling? We'll talk about that on today's episode, and also a front court pairing that I don't feel like has been talked about a lot, but that I'm starting to think about a little bit. And I'm not going to lie, I'm becoming a little bit of a fan of. I kind of want to see this upcoming season. We'll talk about those things in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. And thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. We are on our way to 5,000 subscribers. And if you're listening to this on one of the podcast platforms, you can always go to the YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, like I just said, or you can go to the bottom of one of the podcast platforms you're listening to this to, go to the rating system, leave a 5-star review. I'd really appreciate that. That's another way to support the podcast. So on today's episode, I want to talk about what I believe Saddiq Bey's ceiling could actually be. And also there's another front court lineup, a front court duo that I feel like kind of hasn't been talked about a lot, but I've been thinking about it recently, and I'm kind of talking myself into it. I'm actually pretty interested to see it. I'm sure we'll see it at some point this season. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, I want to talk about what I think Saddiq Bey's ceiling is. Because I know on the last podcast, I mentioned that I thought that at the end of the day, when the Pistons eventually build a championship team, hopefully they do that. But if they do that, eventually when that comes, I believe Saddiq Bey will probably be the fourth best player on that team. First, fourth best player on a championship team was like, pick your choose, Andrew Wiggins, Klay Thompson, or Draymond Green. Like, all those guys are great. Top 50, top 60 players. Like, fourth best player on a championship team is not bad at all. You're a top 50-ish player in the entire NBA. You're a really damn good player. So it wasn't supposed to be a slight at Saddiq. Just want to clarify that real quick. But what do I think his ceiling is? Because I won't say his ceiling is a fourth best player on a championship team. Do I think his ceiling is absolutely high as possible? No, but I'm not going to put a cap on his ceiling. If he ends up better than what I'm going to lay out to you guys here, I won't be shocked. I'm not capping his ceiling, but I'm just giving you what my thinking is, what I predict I think he's going to be at his best. So before we do that, we're going to have to look at what he did this past season. Because people looking at Saddiq Bey's overall season will probably look at him and be like, oh, this guy is not very good. This guy is pretty inefficient. He shoots the ball a lot. He can't. He shoots a low percentage from the field. All this stuff, yada yada yada. But if you watch the Pistons, you would know that Saddiq's first 26 games probably went as bad as you possibly could have imagined. It probably went even worse than Saddiq probably could have possibly imagined his worst start would go. We're not even going to go into the numbers of how bad the first 26 games were, because they were pretty putrid. And if you guys remember going back to that time, through 25 games, we were coming on the podcast saying, okay, 20 games is a pretty decent sample size. What's going on? Should we be worried? What's happening? And then after that, for the rest of the year, he completely flipped a switch. And you guys will remember we talked about during the season as well that I've never seen a switch flip like that so instantly and just maintain for the rest of the season. Because after game 26, Saddiq became a different player. From games 27 to game 82, which Saddiq played all 82 games, which is a major plus. A guy who can play that many games and you can rely on. Looks like he's going to be that type of guy. That's a very valuable dude to have on your team. But anyways, for the next 56 games, Saddiq averaged 18.1 points a game, 5.2 rebounds, 3.1 assists. He shot 41% from the field, 36.4% from deep on 8.1 attempts. And we talked about this a lot in the podcast as well. He started drawing free throws at a really high rate for someone that occupied the ball as much as he did. He started drawing 3.7 free throws a game, shooting 85% on those. Now, there's something I want to talk about with his percentages. I know it says he shot 41% from the field. However, a lot of his attempts, which we talked about on the podcast during the season, a lot of this we already talked about, but I'm just revisiting. I said that he needed to start taking away, and remember, we used to use the phrase trimming the fat off. He needed to stop taking some of these long twos, these contested mid-range shots, and just get back to shooting a lot of threes and getting to the rim, drawing free throws, and shooting a lot of shots at the rim. And that's what he did. 8.1 8.1 of his 14.4 attempts were from beyond the arc. He shot 36% of those. So if you're shooting a majority of your shots from beyond the arc, your field goal percentage is not going to be very high because only 6 of them are coming around the rim, etc. You guys get that. So I want to go look at his efficiency. Last year's league average efficiency on the season was 55.6% true shooting percentage. Saddiq actually was an above average efficient scorer. He shot his true shooting percentage was 56.3%. So he was just above league average. So Saddiq was not inefficient after game 26 last season. He actually was pretty efficient. And for a guy shooting 14.4 attempts a game, for someone who was looked at to be a relatively, decent usage player on a bad team who had to carry a lot of the offensive load for a bad team, him and Cade Cunningham, I think that's pretty damn good for you to maintain above league average, just above. You probably would say he's a league average efficiency, but just above league average efficiency with all the other factors, piling in, and the fact that he was shooting 14 times a game, I think that's pretty good. So Saddiq showed after game 26 that he has a future to be an efficient scorer. He has a pathway to where he can be an efficient scorer. He's not a 39% from the field scorer. He's not going to be a below league average efficient scorer. He has a pathway, and he showed that for the 56 games after game 26, that he has a pathway to be a legitimate, efficient scorer in this league. So what do I think his ceiling is? So I think Saddiq Bey, and again, I'm not capping his ceiling. This is my projection. Do I think he can go past this? Yes. Every young player can go past someone's projection what their ceiling is. This is just what my guess is. I'm going to assume, based on everything we've seen from Saddiq, and there's some more numbers I want to point out here soon, but I think his absolute ceiling is the third best player on a championship team and a dude who has a few all-stars in his career. I don't think he'll be a year in, year out all-star, but I think he'll be someone who maybe ends his career with 3 or 4 all-stars, hits it once every 2-3 years. In a good year, a great year he has, he'll be an all-star. I think that's a really damn good ceiling to have. I think he'll probably be, if I had to put my money on it, I think he would probably be the 4th best player on a championship team, which again would still be a guy who's like top 50, top 60 in the league and could nab an all-star nod a very specific year when he has a great season. But I think he could be even better than that possibly. I think his ceiling would be at a third-year player, and this is how he can get there. And if he wants to get better than that, obviously, I think there's very clear ways he can get better than a third best player on a team. If you guys want to believe he could be like a top 20 player in the NBA or something, I think it's very clear that he would just have to become like one of the best scorers in the NBA kind of thing. But for him to hit his ceiling, from what I think his ceiling is, to be at the absolute most the third best player on the Pistons championship team, which again, I think would probably be around a top 40 player in the NBA. This is what I think he would have to improve on. I want to bring these numbers up right here. And I hope, before I say these numbers, actually, I hope people see through this conversation, through this first segment, that I'm pretty high on Saddiq. I'm just apparently not as high on Saddiq as everybody else is. I think Saddiq's going to be a top 50 player. I can see him getting a few all-star nods in his career. That's a damn good player. So I just want to kind of squash the narrative that I get in my comment section and I get from some of your guys' tweets asking me, why don't you like Saddiq? I just don't get why I get that, because Saddiq I think I'm pretty high on Saddiq. I don't think he's going to be a superstar. If he does, so be it. I'm not capping him, but that's just my guess. Anyways, let's get to some of these numbers. One of the things that really lends itself to Saddiq, and I can tell we're probably going to spend a little bit of this second segment talking about this too. One of the things that really lends itself to Saddiq, and that actually impressed me this past season and made me, after the season, when I went back and started looking at the season, made me think, okay, maybe he could do a little bit more. Maybe he could become better than what I even think right now, is the fact, if you go to his synergy chart, he has 4 play types this past season that he did over 100 possessions of. And right after that, he has 95 possessions of something, 74 possessions of something. Basically, he was asked to do a lot of different things, and he did a lot of different things. And to be frank, he wasn't that bad at any of these things. His most used play type was spot up at 436 possessions. He was in the 55th percentile. We expect that to be better next season. At least I expect him to be better in spot up situations next year. I think he'll be really good. I think he'll be closer to the 80th percentile in spot up situations. His next used play type was in transition, 223 possessions. He was in the 47th percentile. They said that's around average. That's fine. Then he has 147 possessions as a pick and roll ball handler, 52nd percentile. They rate that as good. Pretty damn good for a guy who's supposed to be just a spot up shooter. And then he had 119 possessions as an isolation scorer. And this actually really shocked me. But then when you look deeper into these numbers, it makes sense. He ranked in the 54th percentile as an isolation scorer, and they rate that as good. So for someone that, even I said before the season, probably can't do as much with the ball in his hands. I had questions about whether he could do and create his own shot with the ball in his hands. He did pretty damn good in isolation this past season on decent attempts, on decent possessions, a decent sample size. So how is that? How did someone like me think that, Saddiq wouldn't be able to do a ton with the ball in his hands? How did he play so well with the ball in his hands then? Was he really just creating a bunch of his shots for himself? Was he really just, dribbling so many times and, putting moves on his defender and figuring out a way to get separation? Well, that's kind of what I want to go with in this second segment. Eventually, we'll get to the front court duo. I didn't expect this segment, this topic to extend this far, but it is what it is. Sometimes it extends farther than originally thought. So when we come back, we're going to talk about how did Saddiq actually play pretty well in isolation. We'll talk about that when we come back. But first, I have to tell you guys about some of our sponsors. First up, got to tell you guys a little bit about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in all your sports betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online source for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you absolutely covered. Head to BetOnline today and use your mobile device to learn more about their trends and action today. And again, if you head over to BetOnline, you can get a head start on the NBA season, the NFL season, which is just a few weeks away. You can get a head start. Look at who's the favorites. Take your guess of who you think is going to be the favorite for next season and win the championship in both leagues. Who do you think is going to be the MVP, Rookie of the Year, worst record in the league, will end up with the top pick? You can get a head start on all those kind of things and all kinds of other sports as well at BetOnline.net. So again, head to BetOnline today and use your mobile device to learn more about their trends and action today. BetOnline, where the game starts. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support the podcast. Or if you're listening to this on one of the podcast platforms, go down below to the rating system, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this to. Leave a 5-star review. That's another great way to support the podcast. I'd really appreciate it. Both are incredible ways to show your support for the Locked On Pistons podcast. So, before we went to the ad break, we were talking about Saddiq's isolation numbers and the fact that he had 4 play types that he did over 100 times, over 100 possessions of, which tells me that he's actually a pretty versatile offensive player. Now, I don't know if just watching last season, you would have that immediate takeaway, but definitely looking back at the season, something I did, as soon as the season ended, I really saw that, okay, he was pretty versatile offensively for the Pistons, maybe a little bit even more versatile than I thought he was. But anyways, he had 119 possessions in isolation. Ranked in the 54th percentile. They rated as good on synergy. Pretty damn good. Not great, but good for a guy who's supposed to be just a spot-up shooter. Again, he had 436 possessions as a spot-up guy. So if you're able to be an elite spot-up shooter, which I think he will eventually be a guy who can use the ball sometimes in pick and roll, which he did this last season with 147 possessions, and he was in the 52nd percentile, which is good. If you're able to spot up, use the ball in the pick and roll, and also be decent in isolation, that's a pretty versatile offensive player. If you go and look at his isolation numbers, though, it goes right back to what we were talking about during the season, about how he needed to just trim some of the fat off. He needed to just trim some of these over dribblings possessions that he had. If you look deeper into the numbers, you'll see on his ISOs, now again, he had 117 of these. On his ISOs, 42 of them, no drives. He shot a jumper. Whether that's his, and I like the fact that he has a really good jab step and some footwork. I really like his footwork. So on a lot of his isolations, you'll see that he uses that jab step really well, and then he just shoot the jumper. He won't take any dribbles. He won't drive to the rim. He just shoot a jumper. On those 42 possessions where and again, this is decisive stuff. This is if he's just going to be straight decisive. And that's another thing we talked about during the season that he needed to just be, know what he's going to do it, choose to do it. Don't get in his head so much, just be decisive of what he wants to do. On those 42 possessions, he ranked in the 85th percentile in the NBA. They rated as excellent. He was at the top of the league. On a short shot clock, he had 25 of these ISOs when it's under 4 seconds or less on the shot clock. You know what that means? That means he doesn't have time to try to do, dribble, step back, dribble, all that stuff. He has to go. He has to be quick. He has to be decisive of what he wants to do. And he can't be lackadaisical. He can't waste any time. He has to go with his initial move and do something. He had 25 of those possessions, not a ton sample size, but 25 possessions. He ranked in the 84th percentile, excellent across the league. So when he just shoots a jumper, uses his footwork on a jab step, he doesn't dribble a ton. He is decisive. And he doesn't try to put too many moves. He doesn't try to do too much with the ball in his hands. He's actually really damn good in isolation. However, he had 74 possessions where he drove to the rim, including pull-up jumpers where he dribbled the ball a ton. On those 74 possessions, he ranked in the 21st percentile, which they have as borderline poor and below average. So in order for Saddiq to reach the ceiling that I have for him, that I think he could be at the very best, a third best player on the Pistons championship team, or for him to reach what your guys, a lot of Pistons fans, I should say, think his ceiling is, of possibly being the second best player and being Cade's second banana. For him to reach what I believe his ceiling is, he has to become more consistent defensively. He has to get better on the perimeter. He's a little bit slow-footed on the perimeter. He gets beat a lot. Or if his natural position is at the forward defensively, get stronger and be more consistent in your physicality and effort down there. He has to become a two-way wing. I see that in his future. I think he can be a two-way wing, but he has to commit himself. I think he will. So if he does that on the offensive end, I think Saddiq Bey, for him to hit my ceiling, I'm going to do my ceiling, and then what I think a lot of fans believe he could be, which is Cade's second banana or second best player on a championship team. With mine, I think he just needs to continue to trim that fat off his game and just be very decisive with what he wants to do. He has to become great at what he's already good at. We talked about that a lot last season as well. Like I said earlier, he ranked in the 55th percentile in spot-up possessions. I think he can be an elite spot-up shooter. He has to get great at that. He becomes great at that. That's another 3 points per game. You're looking at a guy who can automatically now be a 20-point per game scorer simply because he's able to hit more outside shots, more spot-up opportunities. And I think he can do that. I think he can get back to being a great transition player. He was only average this past season. He was one of the best in the league his rookie season. I think he can be really good in transition. He just has to be committed to doing it. Pick and roll ball handler. I think he can be just where he was last season, just like around a good pick and roll ball handler, 50th percentile kind of thing. Not great, not terrible, but good. A guy who can spot up, but also have the ball in his hands and make some good plays in the pick and roll. And then in isolation, I think he really, in my opinion, I think he should really just cut out the long isolated ISOs completely cut out the over dribbling, the 3 dribbles. I honestly feel like there was an ISO game that I played in high school. I still play it now in our varsity practices. And it was 3 dribble max. You play at the top of the key, check the ball up, 3 dribble max, get a move, be decisive with it. You have 3 dribbles, try to score the ball. I honestly think, and I don't want to say the coaching staff should say, Saddiq, you only get 3 dribbles, but I think in his head, he should have a mental clock that says, okay, I need to get this move going, and whatever I'm doing, I'm going to get it done in 3 dribbles or less. And I think the numbers show, and if you watched him last season after the first 26 games, that's when he was really at his best. When he was decisive, he didn't try to over dribble. He knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to get to the rim. He was going to draw fouls. He was going to get free throws, shoot really well on free throws, and it was going to be incredibly hard to stop him throughout a game because he can spot up. He can run some in the pick and roll. He can hit some jab step jumpers from either, the high post or the 3-point wing, and he can get to the rim, use his physicality, his strong body, and his ability to draw fouls and draw contact at the rim to get free throws. I think he should just cut out all the mid-range over dribbling and just focus on those things. Because I'm over talking here. If he cuts out all that and instead decides to go from good to elite at those things, you're looking at a 23-point per game score, I think. You don't need to add all the over dribbling in the mid-range area for him to reach what his ceiling is. He could be a 23-point per game scorer on league average efficiency or maybe a little bit over league average efficiency like he did last season, just from going from good to great at the things he's already good at. He goes from being a good spot shooter this past season to a great one, 20-plus point per game scorer. He stays around being a good ball handler in the pick and roll, stays around being a good isolation player, gets better in transition than he was this past season. You're looking at a guy who I think could be scoring 23 points per game in his prime on league average efficiency without needing the ball in his hands 24/7. And when he does have the ball in his hands, a guy you can trust is going to make the right decision and get to the rim, draw free throws, which I think Saddiq, he averaged, like we said, he averaged around 3.5 attempts from the free throw line after the first 26 games of the season this past year. I think he could end up in his prime shooting around 5 to 6 free throws a game, which for some people may be like, oh, that's only 2 free throw difference. No, that's a massive difference. I think if he can get to that, again, I think he could be a 23-plus point per game scorer for the team. But that's where I think his ceiling is. I'm pretty high on Saddiq. Saddiq proved me wrong this past season. I didn't think he had a lot on the ball heading into the season. He proved me wrong. I was willing to admit that. I'm willing to admit that now. And looking back on his season, not only did he show me that he maybe could be more versatile than I thought he was before the season, I think there's a very clear pathway to him becoming a 20-plus point per game scorer that doesn't involve him needing to dribble a ton in the half court. I think he realized his way to success this past season. I think he's going to build upon that. And if he does, I think the Pistons are going to have a really damn good player for a long time. At the very least, I think a top 50, top 60 player. I think at his very best, borderline top 30, top 35, 40 player in the league. I think around there is where his ceiling is. And then for you guys, for those of you who are even higher on Saddiq, in order for him to reach that point where, people are thinking he can be the second best player next to Cade Cunningham, he would need to have that complete offensive arsenal of being able to dribble more and completely break down a defender and become one of the best scorers in the league. I think that's the only way he would be able to hit that. If he's able to hit that, great. He does have a great work ethic. I'm not going to put a cap on the ceiling. So, he could hit that. Again, he has a great work ethic. But my projection, I think the best case scenario for Saddiq is third best player on the team, most likely fourth best player on the team, a top 40, 50-ish player in the NBA in some seasons at his very best, borderline top 35, 30 player in the NBA. I think that's where he'll be. And I think that's going to be a really damn good player. And I don't think that's being low on him at all. But that's where I have it at. I want to give Saddiq, I didn't expect, to be honest, for this to go 23 minutes of just talking about Saddiq. But I kind of want to give Saddiq an episode where I give my full-fledged thoughts on Saddiq, because a lot of people I've seen in the comment section or tweeting at me, asking me questions about how I feel about Saddiq, think that I'm not very high on Saddiq. And that's just not the case. I don't think he's going to be the second best player on the team. I think that's probably either going to be Jaden Ivey or the guy they draft next year. I think the Pistons will have a pretty deep team and a pretty deep starting lineup. And I think him being the fourth best player on a championship team, like I said in the last podcast, is not a slight. It's more of what I think the Pistons are going to have ahead of them, and where I think he will be best slotted to be a potential all-star in the NBA. So that's where I'm at with Saddiq. That's why I think his ceiling is. Looking back in his season, if you look deeper into the numbers, I think you start to come away even more impressed with what he did this past season. And with his kind of work ethic, I think the ceiling can't be capped. But I can make projections. That's what we all do. And my projection is what it is, but I'm not going to cap it. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up better than what I think he could possibly be. So when we come back, we're only going to have one segment to talk about this. We'll probably talk about this more on the next podcast so I can give you guys a little bit more insight and analysis on why I feel this way about this front court duo. But there's a front court duo that I'm becoming more of a fan of that I really want to see this upcoming season. What duo was that? We'll talk about that when we come back from the ad break. So I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support the podcast. Or if you listen to this on one of the podcast platforms, go down below to whatever podcast platform you're listening to. Go to the rating system, leave a 5-star review. Best way to support the podcast. I'd really appreciate both of those things. Now, we only have about 6 minutes left. So I'm going to do a quick hitting analysis about this front court duo, and then we'll talk about it more, I'm sure, by the end of the week on another podcast. I might bring someone on to talk about it with me. But this duo is Marvin Bagley and Jalen Duren. And I feel like a lot of the duos that you've heard people talk about in the front court with the Pistons either includes Isaiah Stewart with Duren or Bagley or potentially Noel, or Duren with Noel, or again, like I said, Stu. I don't feel like we really heard a ton about Marvin Bagley, Jalen Duren front court duo. And I get there's definitely questions with it, but there's some things that I'm actually pretty interested in seeing, and makes me think that maybe they could actually be better than some people may initially think. One, Jalen Duren coming into the draft, one of his like pros of what he could potentially become or get better at was his passing, his playmaking ability. And you immediately saw that in the summer league. He was really damn good hitting guys on the backdoor cuts. He was really looking for it. He showed a few times some kickouts that I really like to see too. You can tell that there's a playmaker, or when I say playmaker, I'm not a guy who's going to go out there looking like Jokic, but a guy at the center position who can operate your offense from the high post, be the hub of the offense, hit guys when he needs to, hit guys in the short roll when he needs to. I think you absolutely can see that in Jalen Duren's future. So that's one reason why I think this lineup and this front court duo could really work well. Because Marvin Bagley, I don't think can play the 5. I think he probably is a 4, but that comes with a lot of issues. If he's playing the 4, how do you operate spacing and how do you operate on defense? Now, if Jalen Duren can be that type of passer that I think he can become, and that he showed in Summer League, to be honest, there's a few things you can do with Marvin Bagley. First thing, you can keep him in the dunker spot. And I think that Jalen Duren 100% is showing that he has the potential to be one of those short roll passers that, you know, if you put Marvin Bagley, who's another athletic freak, with another athletic freak in Jalen Duren, you put both those guys, you put Duren rolling to the rim, you put Marvin Bagley in a dunker spot. If Jalen Duren's rolling to the rim with the ball in his hands, defender doesn't come up, he's dunking. And if you come in late, he's dunking on you. But if you're sitting there waiting for him and they rotate, the defense rotates pretty quickly and stops him before he can get all the way to the rim, then you got Marvin Bagley, who's another, again, athletic freak who can catch a lob and slam it down. And I think Jalen Duren has the potential to do that. If a defender cuts him off on his roll, he can see Marvin Bagley in that dunker spot, lob it up to him over this rotating help defense. And I think it will be incredibly hard to guard in that area. Or, and this kind of ties into number 2, which is Marvin Bagley will have to improve, I think, in his outside shooting as well. And this comes down, and again, this is passing with Jalen Duren. If you can put him, Marvin Bagley in a dunker spot, or you can have him spotting up in the corner, and Jalen Duren has shown that he can have the ability to find him in both areas. The reason why the Marvin Bagley duo intrigues me is the fact that he's a better athlete than Stu is. Stu, you probably could see a little bit more of the spot up, like Jalen Duren will be able to hit him on a spot up opportunity. But Marvin Bagley kind of interests me more because I know he can be in the dunker spot, and he has in a season. Now, it was a very short season for him. And he has basically all of his seasons are short sample sizes, but we have seen a season where Marvin Bagley shot 34% from deep on 2.3 attempts. We've seen that season. Now, it was 2 years ago, but we have seen that season. In that year, he shot 41% from the corners. We've seen that happen with Marvin Bagley. We haven't seen it yet with Stu. People want to project it with Stu. That's fine. We'll see if it happens. His shot looked better in Summer League. We'll see if it actually happens. However, Marvin Bagley, again, has shown that it has happened for a season. It hasn't happened since, but it's happened. So if Marvin Bagley is able to be someone who is greatly utilized in the dunker spot, someone who, like we've mentioned last year, he shot 86% at the rim for the Pistons in his time. That's absolutely tremendous. That was basically anytime he gets around the rim, it's a finish. You might as well get back on offense, kind of thing for the defense. Really good. If he's able to do that, while also getting back closer to that from the corner spots as a spot up 4 on certain, depending on how the defense is playing it. Also, another thing that can come from him spotting up in the corner, I'm kind of jumping multiple places here, but if he can also spot from the corner, he'll be really good on cutting down the baseline and catching a lob that way too. So that whole little baseline area, I think Marvin Bagley has the potential to be better than Stu. And I think instead of Stu replacing him with Duren has shown better playmaking chops than Stu. I think Duren will be a better playmaker, and he's shown that. So he'll be able to identify and be able to really take advantage of Marvin Bagley's ability to really dominate that baseline, corner, cutting from the corner, and the dunker spot. I think that is an incredibly intriguing duo in the front court. And if you include that with 3 shooters around them and 2 playmakers around them as well, like let's say Killian and Cade, or Killian and Ivy, or Cade and Ivy, any of those duos, you plant Saddiq with them. I think if you have those 3 guys, and then also a dude who can play make from the center position, find an open guy, and a guy in Marvin Bagley who could potentially just dominate that baseline area everywhere, corner, cutting from the corner, dunker spot, I think that would be incredibly hard to stop offensively. So that's why this front court duo is kind of intriguing to me. It's one that I've started thinking about a little bit more over the past week or so. Again, it would really rely on, one, during that passing really translating to the NBA, which I think it will. And Marvin Bagley dominating the dunker spot, which he will. Dominating on cuts to the rim on the baseline, which I think he can, and he will. And showing a minor improvement, some kind of improvement from the corner 3-point spot, which again, he's shown at some point in his career that he was able to do it pretty well. So if he can get back towards that, I think that duo right there would be really good. And I think Jalen Duren as well. I didn't really even talk about this. We'll talk about this in a future episode even more. But Duren will be able to, I think, cover some of Marvin Bagley's defensive issues on that end. He projects to be a pretty good rim protector. I think having that guy behind Marvin Bagley, along with what he can do offensively, makes him probably the kind of perfect duo partner for Marvin Bagley to best utilize Marvin Bagley, allow him to be on the floor against good teams, and to bring the best out of him. So that's where I'm at with that. Let me know what you guys think about that front court duo in the comment section down below, or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. That's all I've got for you guys today. I want to thank all of you guys who continue listening to the podcast every day, all of you guys who tweet at me and message me and email me. I've gotten emails, message me, comment below, saying all the love. I really appreciate all that, man. I appreciate all you guys that listen and give me all of that. That's it really does make my day. I'm happy that I can be a part of your guys' day and, you know, give you guys some joy and some fun with the Pistons around 35 minutes a day. So whether that's on the way to a work or on the way to dropping off your kids or wherever it is, I really appreciate that I can be a part of you guys' day and make your day a little bit better and a little bit more fun. So thank you guys for all the support. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Peace out, everybody.